You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that it's you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here, but I'm in the disguise of a cartoon mouse. Don't tell the creationists, or that last guy who was here, I'm hiding out from my responsibilities on this boat. But not, of course, my responsibilities to you, my audience. When last we left off, Lantern was lying about more papers than I even want to count, and I want to thank my guest from last week for taking that off my plate. I may not have survived with that much weaponized brain damage being thrown at me. Lantern seems to be finally done with hominins, and now it looks like he's going to lie about vestigial organs. Remember, vestigial doesn't mean useless. But how much would you like to bet he'll pretend it does anyway?
Now we have something called vestigial organs. What is vestigial organs?
Vestigial organs are those organs which have been retained during the process of evolution which have lost some or all of their ancestral function. And that's not some special Dapper definition. That's adapted from the first sentence on vestigiality from Wikipedia. That's just the normal definition. As you know, I don't normally use Wikipedia as a source for my videos, but I'm doing so now because my point is just how ordinary the definition is. And if anything, Wikipedia is going to give you the stock, standard, boring, and ordinary view of things like this. So I'm using it to emphasize just how standard that definition is.
Vestigial organs, and I want to say something important here. Vestigial organs is the claim that there are organs that are useless.
No.
They're not useful for survival and reproduction. They're not useful for that animal because they're left over of a previous ancestor.
No, they have lost some or all of the ancestral function, but that means they have retained some of it or gained new function along the way. In many ways, your ear bones are vestigial jaw bones, and your jaw bones are vestigial gills. I would hazard to say that you would consider neither your ears nor your jaws useless.
Like, for example, if I had a tail, for example, yeah?
Okay, he does in fact have a tail, so this should be easy.
His useless tail is not helping me survival and reproduction, but actually it's coming from previous ancestors. That's why he's still there.
Well, yes, he does have a tail, and it's non-functioning as a tail, because it doesn't even extend past the body wall. So yes, it's vestigial, even though it retains muscle attachment sites.
So that is the claim. Now, the first thing I want to put forward, and it's a very important thing to look at when it comes to this idea of vestigial organ, it is based on circular reasoning.
Creationists love to say that things that aren't circular are. So let's go ahead and see what fresh hell Lantern has for us.
Why is it based on circular reasoning? Now, that's very important to look at now. Because they claim these organs are vestigial, they're useless. Why? Because evolution is true.
No, that's not why. First, they're usually not completely useless. That's a straw man of vestigiality. They're of diminished function because they manifestly are when compared to the same structure in similar animals. For example, ostrich wings are very clearly wings in their anatomy, but they are useless for flight. Human ear muscles are clearly the same as the muscles that let your pet dog or cat swivel its ears to get a better fix on the position of something making a sound. But they can't let humans do that, so they are of diminished function, and I would argue, in this case, of no function. Why organisms would have such structures, which clearly in similar organisms are fully functional, is hard to explain apart from evolutionary theory.
And evolution says that all organs must be used for survival and reproduction.
No, it doesn't. That's why some vestigial organs don't really have a use, they're just leftovers. But it's also why so many retain some function or have gained new ones.
Because evolution is true, they're vestigial organ. And because they're vestigial organ, the evidence that evolution is true.
Nice draw, man, you've got there, Lantern. It would be a shame if anyone noticed that it can't fight back while you're beating it up.
No, I want you to look at this circle.
Ah, the braying of a pack of hyenas.
People don't think about that, but this is circular reasoning, literally.
No, it's lying or just colossal amounts of idiocy.
Yeah,
you understand what I'm saying? They say vestigial organs are evidence for evolution. I'm not making this claim. Yeah. They make this claim.
That's true.
Let's read it here. Why evolution is true, right? By Jerry A. Coyne. Right? He has on page 60. What does he say? He says, we humans have vestigial features proving that we evolved. The most famous is the appendix, right? Which, by the way, I just put a research from 2018 showing how it is very useful. In fact, there is a research under it saying how appendix could save your life.
Yep, it could. And it's probably not vestigial because it's probably not homologous with the vermiform cecum. We learn this by doing this thing called science, something that apparently Lantern and Sabor are fundamentally opposed to.
How it actually saves you from certain diseases that will kill you. But the point is that this is circular reasoning.
Saying it repeatedly won't make it true.
They're claiming they're vestigial because evolution is true, and they're vestigial, therefore they're proving evolution is true. How are we not challenging this nonsense? You know?
They're not challenging it because they fundamentally do not understand it.
Now, the claims that they make is also lies.
Now, that's what I call projection.
Like the appendix, for example, is a claim. Another claim is the inverted retina in the eye.
I have never heard the claim that the retina is in any way vestigial, and that paper certainly does not claim that it is. It's in the description.
Which is very sophisticated, very useful, and I'm putting the research here, showing you how it is super useful for the human eye. And then you got someone like Richard Dawkins in his book, The Blind Watchmakers, claiming it's useless as evidence for evolution.
As loath as I am to defend Richard Dawkins, no one who has spent as much time and spilt as much ink as he has on the topic of the evolution of the eye is someone who says that eyes are useless. He has never once said that the retina is useless or vestigial, and if Lantern wants to say otherwise, it's on him to show where Dawkins said that.
Because it's a vestigial organ, according to him.
That's just a flat-out lie.
Okay, you've got the whale pelvic bones. And I want to say something very important. We've got research, that link that I put, we've got research 150 years ago, Brother Sabur, saying that they are useful for mating.
Yep, that's one of the well-known secondary functions of pelvises. If you're comfortable with it and have ever reproduced, feel free to put in the comments whether your pelvis was involved in the whole mating event. Of course, the fact is that whale pelvises are useless for walking, which is the primary purpose for most of them in animals with a pelvis, so they are indeed vestigial.
And then we have a book today, Biology by Ravens and Johnson, taught in universities. 2017 edition still has the information.
What, the information that whale pelvises are vestigial? Good, it should have that information, because it's true. I don't know how many times I have to say it, but vestigial doesn't mean functionless, and it really never has. It means no or reduced function compared to ancestral function. Whale pelvises definitely fit the bill. What with how useless they are for walking and supporting weight, they aren't even connected to the axial skeleton.
Now my question is, can you please tell me, I already mentioned one example like this, right? But can you please tell me, have they missed a research that been done? Even that research I'm putting now that is recent, they're quoting that research from 150 years ago. Are you telling me those professors in universities are supposed to be editing these books, teaching them to students? They do not know that there is 150 years ago research showing how these pelvic bones are actually used for mating for the whales.
No, I did not miss that. I'm quite sure that those of them involved in that whole whale bit know that. It's just that these authors are operating on the real definition of vestigiality, not the straw man that Lantern seems to accept. And frankly, when I notice that I disagree with all the experts and authors in a field, I tend to step back and wonder what I missed. Lantern seems to sit back and wonder how all the people smarter than he is could actually be so dumb. It seems rather narcissistic to me to assume that oneself, a complete layman with no training, actually has noticed obvious things like that whale pelvises are useful in mating, but all the experts in that field have just missed it, and that therefore the unifying theory of an entire branch of science has just been dealt a blow by oneself. I know the first thing about Arabic, but it's far from clear that I know the second thing about the language. Lantern, I'm sure, knows the first, second, and third thing about the language. If I were to go around spouting a misunderstanding of a fundamental aspect of the language, like perhaps saying that all Arabic adpositions are in fact postpositions and that neither prepositions nor prefix adpositions exist in the language, and then as my explanation for this I simply got wrong what an adposition is in the first place, Lantern would be well within his rights to simply ignore me. But that is the position he is in vis-a-vis biologists. He doesn't even seem to know the first thing about biology. He can't even tell that a different binomial means different species. And yet this man thinks he knows enough about evolutionary theory that he can debunk it in a live stream on YouTube, while showing sources that actually contradict him the whole time.
Therefore, they're no longer, as they claim, vestigial organs. 2017, this book is being taught in universities.
The fact that Lantern doesn't understand something isn't good reason for it not to be taught. My guess is that he'd be really bad at tensor calculus, but my guess is that physicists are still going to learn it anyway.
Okay, and you've got someone like Richard Dawkins. He's claiming, oh, look, this is evidence for evolution. You've got Stephen Jay Gould. He's saying the same thing.
Well, yeah, they're right. There is no good reason that anyone has come up with, that I'm aware of, to explain why a designer would use a mostly broken part to do a few things that could be accomplished without evidently breaking some functional thing somewhere else. Like penguin flippers. They have wrist and elbow joints that are completely locked, despite having the anatomy of a wing with mobile wrist and elbow joints. The flipper would be stronger without these joints, so why do they exist? It's hard to see why, except if they are in fact evolved versions of wings which have been co-opted as aquatic flippers.
All the people that you see, you hear the biggest names propagating evolution. If you open their books, these are the things they're using. Brother and sister, I'm not bringing you something from last century. Yeah, I'm bringing you what they write in their books claiming this is evidence for evolution.
It's still amazing to me that Lantern can look at all the people who know more about this topic, all agreeing on something, and then think that no, he's the one who knows what's up. They must just be dumb. It's even more amazing that he can read the papers he links and not realize they actually say mostly the opposite of what he says. In fact, I'm not positive he's not simply lying and isn't as monumentally stupid as he seems.
And I'm bringing you their own magazines showing you how these quote-unquote evidences are actually not evidences, and how they're lying, ignoring research 150 years ago completely as if it doesn't exist.
No one is ignoring research on whale pelvic muscle attachment. It just doesn't mean what Lantern thinks it does.
I want to be honest, this is not an in-depth research that I put forward, by the way.
Yeah, that was pretty obvious.
I organized this because Brother Sabur recently just told me that he wants me to come on. I literally organized all of this today. A few hours, I put everything together.
It took me many hours to read the papers he has cited. I couldn't possibly have done it in only 2 hours. So I guess we know that Lantern did not read the papers, as that would be impossible. Even just reading the abstracts as well as finding the articles would almost certainly take more than 2 hours. Clearly all Lantern did was check the headlines. I consider that dishonest. Muslim Lantern, in the very unlikely chance that you bother to watch this, I want you to explain this to me. You can come on my channel and we can chat about what it means to cite a source, because I guarantee it's more than reading the title of an article or paper and assuming that you just know what that means.
If you really want me to put an in-depth research of the amount of lies that these people put forward, I can do that.
Yes, I would. That would be far, far better than just vomiting out links to papers with headlines that he thinks are useful to him, but which not only does he think no one in his audience will check, but that he himself did not check. I can't imagine how his argument couldn't be improved by actually bothering to do the first bit of research. Even if he doesn't change his conclusions, at least he could talk about them with more sophistication.
This is not an in-depth research, brothers. This is a basic surface level showing you how these people are lying, okay?
And ironically, it showed how Lantern is lying, but also massively uninformed about very basic aspects of evolutionary biology.
Let's go here and share this link. Let me show you one thing here. Interesting. I want to show you what they're saying, okay?
In order for him to do that, you'd think he'd have to know himself, but clearly he doesn't because he has only spent a couple hours looking at what they say, and it wasn't to find out what they actually said, it was to get headlines that he thought would work for him. This is cherry-picking and quote mining at its finest.
What they say, where reproduction is all in the hips. New study, look, that we said 150 years ago there is information about this.
Yeah, welcome to science, where the fact that some study came out a century and a half ago doesn't preclude new studies on the same or similar topic.
New study that turns a long-accepted evolutionary assumption on its head. That's what they're saying.
No, that's what Robert Perkins, a pop sci writer for the University of Southern California, said. It's not what the study said. The study does contrast its findings with the claim that whale pelvises are useless vestiges, but not with the idea that they are vestigial at all. The study is Sexual Selection Targets Cetacean Pelvic Bones by Dines et al., published in Evolution, Volume 68, Issue 11, the 1st of November 2014, and it's linked in the description.
Brothers and sisters, this is not what I'm saying. This is what they're saying in their magazines.
Well, it's a website, not a magazine, and it's a pop sci article that is once again using a clickbait title that does not accurately reflect what's in the paper. Let's read from the paper just a bit. The ancestors of whales and dolphins were four-legged, land-dwelling mammals, returning to the aquatic environment roughly 54 million years ago. Concomitant with the loss of external hind limbs and the evolution of a streamlined fluke-powered swimming, the cetacean pelvic girdle evolved to a highly reduced state, over the span of roughly 7 million years. Cetacean pelvises no longer share a symphysis at the sacrum, no longer contact the vertebral column, have lost their acetabulum and obturator foramen, and evolved such a small size that there is still no general consensus as to which of the three fused bones found in their terrestrial ancestor, ischium, ilium, and pubis, they derive from. This is significant because we later read, the ischiocavernosus muscles attach to the pelvis in all mammals, but cetacean pelvic bones are unique because they are no longer constrained by sacral and hind limb attachments or by hind limb locomotion, potentially freeing them to diverge according to penis morphology. It seems like this paper fully acknowledges that whale pelvic bones do not retain their full ancestral function, and in fact depends on this fact. Far from the vestigiality of whale pelvises being overturned, this paper would be impossible if not for their vestigial nature. In fact, the paper only uses the word vestiges 3 times, twice quoting Curtis and Barnes, 1989, to indicate that they are not useless vestiges as those authors thought, and once to point out that whales also, in some cases, have the vestiges of femora.
It's saying that it's turning this evolutionary assumption, while 150 years ago, I'm telling you, this information has been already, people have been sleeping and they know this information, you know?
Odd that as evidence of scientists sleeping on this information for over a century, we are now presented with a paper from only a decade ago that is doing the very opposite of that. It seems like rather than sleeping on this information, it has been the basis for ongoing research in biology.
The actual professors, they know this nonsense, okay? Now, we've got another example of snakes, pythons. You got a book, Essentials of Biology. Again, taught in universities. 2018 edition.
I wonder what this will be about. Probably not hand limps, as Lantern has on his slide, but I suppose that might be a hard-to-explain typo for hind limbs.
There's a research 50 years ago already showing how the hand, what they call the hand limbs.
I'm pretty sure nothing is called a hand limp. In fact, checking the paper, yes, it's about hind limbs.
Are actually hooks used for fighting and mating by the pythons.
Yeah, because these hind limbs have only one joint, the pelvic joint, and are now useless for locomotion, making them vestigial. The fact that they are still useful in aligning the cloacas of male and female snakes and in lifting the scales near the female's cloaca to allow mating in no way invalidates this. Also, the link that Lantern provides just lists the paper and the articles that cite it, but doesn't actually provide a way to access the paper even for money, which means I doubt that Lantern read the paper, which was a short but interesting paper about an experiment with captive Burmese pythons and their mating behaviors.
While they will claim to you today, in 2018, in their books, and what you learn in university, probably some people watching this, they might be learning in the university. Yeah, I want you to open your textbooks that you're learning from, and you go to the page of vestigial organs, and you will see these things I'm telling you about in these books. Yeah, 2018.
Probably in 2024 too, which is when I'm writing this.
50 years ago, there is a research debunk. 40 years ago, there is a research debunking that, but they're still lying in 2018 in their books.
Man, Lantern might be peak projectionist, given that there's every indication that not only can he not understand these papers, but that he didn't even try. This is so lazy and a great example of the bullshit asymmetry principle, where it takes far more effort and time to debunk nonsense than it does to spew it. Here I am actually bothering to find these papers and go further than their headlines to see what they actually say, and Lantern here just gets to grab their titles or even the titles of pop sci articles about the papers. Life must be so much easier as a creationist where it doesn't matter if you're right, and no one who likes your work will be likely to fact check you.
Claiming that, you know what, this is evidence, this is vestigial organs. You've got penguin wings, you've got the ostrich wings. I can go on and on and on, right?
Yes, I'm sure he can go on and on, because he can keep failing to understand vestigial organs. It's not really hard to misapply a certain principle to all the objects that are affected by that principle. And given how long the evolutionary history of Earth is, there are a lot of vestigial organs out there, nearly all of which I'm sure will have some minor function. But so what? They're still vestigial. They're still only well explained by evolution, and Lantern is still a lazy liar. Let's read the meaning of Quran 2, 9, and 10.
They seek to deceive Allah and the believers, yet they only deceive themselves, but they fail to perceive it. There is sickness in their hearts, and Allah has let their sickness increase. They will suffer a painful punishment for their lies.
It's almost like this was written to Lantern.
Point is, as I said, I just collected some of them. I don't want to go into extensive detail. Point is, anything that they will claim to you is vestigial organs. There is a function for it, and there is research demonstrating that there is a function for it, but they will lie, and they will still claim it's evidence, like I just showed you, Jerry Coyne in his book, Evolution is True.
Imagine being the guy who cited all these papers without reading them, who doesn't understand evolutionary theory, and whose best argument is to simply fail to understand what vestigial organs are, accusing actual biologists, who would love to expose each other if given half an opportunity, of being the ones who are lying in this circumstance.
Claiming to you the famous, he says the most famous is the appendix. He's claiming it's the famous that people are sharing that the appendix is useless.
As I've said, yeah, the appendix probably isn't vestigial. Now, if people were lying about that, why would the position on vestigiality of the appendix have changed? On the other hand, we have a willful idiot here who doesn't know anything about the topic, who either can't or won't read the sources he's pretending to cite, complaining about things he can't even comprehend. If I had to decide this based on trust, I think I'd throw my lot in with the experts rather than this mendacious moron.
And we've already got research showing you that it can save your life. You know? So buy their own nature magazines, okay? Let's move on.
Yes, please, let's do. I need a change from the relentless inability to understand what vestigial structures are.
Okay, now we've got something here called homology, right? Maybe some people heard about homology or not, but okay.
Now we can have a relentless inability to understand homology. How fun.
What is the idea of homology?
Great question. Homology is the observation that some organisms tend to have structures that have the same basic structure, even though the structures differ in detail and sometimes in function. These structures are recognized not only through their morphological similarity, but also from a common embryological development. For example, the human pelvis and legs are known to be homologous to the aforementioned whale pelvis and hind legs, because not only are they morphologically linked, but they develop from and around the embryonic posterior limb bud in both organisms. Homology can be accommodated by common design, but only evolution actually retrodicts this feature of life that was noticed well before universal common ancestry was accepted in the scientific community. In fact, it was noticed way back when species fixity was the dominant idea in science.
Homology is the idea that the similarities between creatures in anatomy are due to common descent. Okay?
No, not really okay at all. That definition is far too simplistic and would allow analogous features. This is features of organisms that have superficial similarities, but have anatomies that are fundamentally different to be seen as homologous. For example, while a bird and a bat wing are homologous as forelimbs, they are only analogous as wings, even though the overall wing shape and proportional size of a particular bat wing may be nearly identical to that of a particular bird wing, and both flap to produce thrust and lift while aloft. My definition from earlier is much better and will not result in this confusion.
Is this my claim? No. I'm bringing you what they say in their books. Okay, Essentials of Biology, 2018 edition, page 247. They say the unity of anatomy is evidence of common ancestor.
Yes, because genetics is the core of inheritance, and I don't think that it's at all controversial to say that anatomy is mostly determined by genetics. Therefore, if organisms share genetic ancestry, this will show in the ways their anatomies are both similar and different, resulting in a twin-nested hierarchy of genetics and morphology. And what do you know? But that's what we find in the real world, providing quite conclusive evidence for common ancestry.
I'm not saying that. They're saying that in their books, right?
Right.
And they say here, homologous structures suggest common derivation, right?
Right.
So they're claiming that. Biology by Ravens and Johnson, Essentials of Biology by 2018. This is recent things. I'm not claiming something from the last century, yeah? Okay?
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it!
So that means what? The more similar the creatures are, the closer they are in relation. Am I correct in my understanding, Brother Sabur?
Well, I'm not Brother Sabur, but I think I'll answer anyway. He's almost correct. But what similarity there is matters, not simply that there is similarity. For example, you might find a butterfly that has a more similar color to a particular bird than that bird has to any other birds. That does not indicate a close relationship. That's why things like multivariate analysis and knowing the difference between homology and analogy is important. And while I don't know for certain, I feel like Lantern is going to have trouble with that. One group who won't have trouble with that is my subscribers, so why not subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and hit the like button so you can perform your own multivariate analysis without getting confused like Lantern here.
Doesn't that mean the closer they are in the looks based on this information? You're muted, by the way, if you want to say something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. You were in a flow, and I didn't want to stop you. But
yeah, no problem.
Because you know when you get going.
Absolutely. I appreciate that a lot.
I mean, what you're saying so far is the concisest way to explain these points. Because the deeper you get, it can actually get more confusing.
Yeah, it's almost like biology is complex and not that easy to understand in all aspects. But the problem is that if you dumb it down to the point that you're not really accounting for the complexity, then it can lead people to draw the wrong conclusion. And it seems like that's the goal these two have.
But that's the crux of it, what you just explained.
Okay, khair inshallah. Okay, let's move on to the next point, okay?
Hell, it's about time.
Okay, so here what do we have? Can you spell these two, because it's easier for me to say Mashimiyat and Jirobiyat. You can spell the two on the top.
Yeah,
you can spell.
Marsupials and placentals.
Can you explain to the people the difference between the two?
I'm not sure if Sabor can, but placental animals are those that have an extensive term of pregnancy and have complex and long-lasting placental structures. Marsupial mammals have an only rudimentary placenta, and their young are born relatively underdeveloped, usually hairless and blind, and who then attach to a teat firmly, where they grow externally feeding on milk rather than nutrients supplied by the placenta. Placental mammals also lack an epipubic bone, which is present in other mammals, including very basal mammals. There are also distinguishing bits of hind limb anatomy, but I won't get too far into that unless it becomes relevant. Marsupials also have distinguishing features such as a foramen lacrymale just anterior to the orbit of the skull, split or double penises, and split or double uteri or even vaginas. That should probably be enough to cover the differences, although obviously, this being biology, it does go deeper than that.
Okay, so you have two different types of mammals here, and these are geographically distinct.
Kind of. Marsupials evolved largely in Gondwana, and placentals largely in Laurasia. Gondwana was a southern supercontinent, and Laurasia a northern one, and their breakup from Pangaea started in the early Jurassic period. This is why fossil marsupials are found in South America, Antarctica, and Australia. In modern times, the only continents with long-standing native populations of marsupials are South America and Australia. The North American opossum, Didelphis virginiana, is a relatively recent migrant to North America, only arriving after the formation of the Isthmus of Panama some 3 million years ago, and it remains the only wild marsupial found north of the Mexican-US border. Obviously, there are no more Antarctic marsupials, but they remain the majority group of mammals in Australia, with the only placental mammals there being humans, animals introduced by humans, and various native bat species. Placental mammals also dominate South America, having got there from Africa when the two continents were much closer, and others having migrated south when the isthmus formed. Of course, all this biogeography fits in well with evolution in deep time, but makes very little sense with either a young Earth or special creation.
Right? You get some in remote parts of the world which are completely unrelated to the others.
No, marsupials are not completely unrelated to other marsupials or to placentals. Further, I'm not sure that I would call all of North and South America and Australia remote, but then again, these two live in Great Britain, so perhaps they simply mean far from where they are. But hey, opossums are highly adaptable scavengers with a quick rate of reproduction. It wouldn't surprise me if someday a population of them were introduced to Great Britain and were able to thrive, since they can survive quite well in even dense urban environments, much like how parts of Spain now have a raccoon problem. Also, before anyone mentions it in the comments, yes, a common variation in the United States and Canada calls this animal a possum without the O. And yes, that's also the name of an only distantly related Australian marsupial. That doesn't make it wrong for people to call D. virginiana a possum. That's just how language works.
Yet they have similarities in terms of their traits and anatomical features, which to the untrained eye, you would say these two creatures are related, but it's actually, according to them, independent convergent evolution.
Well, they're both related and examples of common ancestry. For example, sugar gliders and flying squirrels look superficially similar, and they have very similar ecologies. But if you look under the hood, they have distinct reproductive strategies, very different dentition, differences both in hand and foot anatomy, as well as other differences in the hind limb anatomy. When all of this is taken into account, you find that deep down the sugar glider has more in common with a kangaroo than with a squirrel, which has more in common with a human than a sugar glider. Conveniently, genetics backs this up.
It's not actually due to common ancestry, and that totally smashes this idea that similarities are due to common descent.
Well, it would smash that idea if that were actually the idea, but just like I predicted, they are simply ignoring the ability of scientists to distinguish between analogy and homology prior to making conclusions about the common ancestry of different groups. By leaving out a huge and important aspect of morphology-based cladistics, they're giving us a straw man version of evolution.
Because we have to remember, everything goes back to concepts. So if similarities are due to common descent, that means that differences must be due to separate ancestry. And that means that if there's similarities that are found that are not due to common descent, then that undermines their entire thesis.
Except that some similarities are due to common ancestry and others based on common selection after divergence. And we have ways to tell which are which. One of the big ones is developmental changes. The earlier in embryology a difference emerges, the more likely it is that subsequent developments that make a superficial similarity are actually just analogous rather than homologous. Also, some things are known to be rather superficial and easy to change via evolution, like tooth size, body weight, etc. So those things are generally not given much weight when it comes to determining ancestry and homology versus analogy. Only in cases of closely related organisms is it really hard to figure out if a feature is homologous or analogous. For instance, pigs and cows both walk on two hooves, but they have dew claws that rarely touch the ground, and while not completely useless, are vestigial. On the other hand, peccaries do not have dew claws, but do walk on two hooves. So we have a few possibilities. Perhaps pigs and cows and peccaries all evolved from an ancestor that walked on two claws and had two dew claws, but peccaries lost their dew claws after they split with pigs. Or perhaps all three evolved from an animal that walked on four claws, and cows and peccaries plus pigs independently evolved to walk on two claws, with peccaries then losing the outermost fingers entirely. These animals are closely related, and it may be difficult to figure out which option is true. However, this does not do anything to remove the conclusion of common ancestry of, say, even-toed ungulates or artiodactyls as a whole. The development of primary weight-bearing structures from digits 3 and 4 are fundamental to these animals and occur at a similar stage in embryology in all of them, and their genetics back up common ancestry.
This is something I, funnily enough, had a debate yesterday with Skydive Phil in the park.
Never heard of him, but that's a cool name. My name isn't nearly as cool as that.
Because they don't tell us about these probabilities. They don't tell us about the assumptions that they're making.
I mean, unless you bother to read the papers, the fact that Sabor isn't familiar with the literature isn't because someone is hiding it. It's because he hasn't bothered to educate himself, which is a him problem, not a problem with science. Most scientific fields contain complexities that lay people will never grasp, simply because it won't matter to their lives and they're busy. That's okay, that's simply how it has to be. One human lifetime isn't enough to become an expert in everything. I'm pretty well informed about some things, but I'm never going to become an expert in Swahili literature, even if I started learning the language right this minute. That doesn't mean that such experts aren't out there. It doesn't mean that they're hiding things from me. It doesn't mean that if I don't understand or like their conclusions, that they're wrong.
Because the fact is, if you start off with assumptions, whatever conclusions you make are going to be based upon those assumptions.
Let's see what assumptions are needed in evolutionary biology that aren't already firm conclusions from prior science. That the universe works according to consistent principles. That's basically it. Sure, there are things that are assumed in evolutionary biology in the sense of not needing to be demonstrated in every single paper, but rather being taken for granted. Things like DNA being the molecule of heritability, the basic functioning of biochemistry, the ancient age of the Earth, etc. But all of those things are assumed not because they are unevidenced but necessary for evolutionary theory to make sense, but rather because they have been in evidence for a long time and have not been meaningfully challenged. That's what assumptions in science usually are. Firm conclusions from prior science that have yet to be overturned. When you're writing a paper about astrophysics, you don't need to rederive all of Einstein's field equations. You can just take them as a given. Similarly, you don't need to go and measure the mass of every element. You can just grab that from a reference. This is how we can let science build upon itself. Without this ability to use these so-called assumptions, science would always have to start at square one in each paper. Further, these so-called assumptions are also not hidden.
So a lot of these examples that you're actually giving, these examples only go on to highlight the assumptions that they have in the beginning, why they're erroneous. But even if, Muhammad, you never had these examples, it would not change the conclusions that we're currently arriving at.
Well, yeah, Sabor is coming to these conclusions despite and without regard to evidence. So of course evidence is irrelevant, except as a rhetorical device. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's how you end up wrong, and you stay wrong. Also, I guess Lantern's real name is Muhammad? I'm going to keep calling him Lantern. It's what I'm used to, and if he wanted to be called Muhammad, I presume he'd use that as his display name.
Absolutely. And the basic difference between these two types of animals is, for example, kangaroos, they have the baby, they still hold it in the sack, and then it still feeds and comes back until it's ready to come out. While other animals will give birth, and the animal will be able to go by itself and after the birth is given, right?
Well, yes and no. Most marsupials have a pouch, but not all do. In fact, the short-tailed opossum, genus Monodelphis, has no pouch, and given that different groups of marsupials have pouches that open in different directions, it seems that pouches are actually something that evolved more than once in marsupials. Marsupials are not defined by their pouches, even though they are extremely common. Also, at a basic level, a pouch is simply a fold of skin, which means that it is not a major change to evolve one, or for it to evolve to open to the front or back. So it's the kind of feature that is of only limited use in determining the shape of common ancestry. For example, wombats and kangaroos share a common ancestor, but given that wombats have a backwards-facing pouch and kangaroos have forward-facing pouches, it's very unlikely that their common ancestor had a pouch. And since their common ancestor was more recent than the common ancestor they shared with opossums, as evidenced by things like the syndactyly shared by marsupials in Australia but not with American marsupials, the common ancestor of all three species probably did not even have a pouch, even though most opossums do. This means pouches probably evolved at least 3 times in marsupials. See what I mean about how just a bit of investigation can show you that pouches are analogous across different groups of marsupials, meaning that this similarity isn't just naively chalked up to common ancestry, but instead more factors are taken into account to give a more nuanced and full picture of evolution? It's almost like scientists know what they're talking about when they use homology and can distinguish it from analogy.
So that's the difference between these two types of animals. And they look the same. Now, the same book that I quoted, Biology by Rivers and Johnson, in the previous page, that said to us here that these homologous structures, they are evidence for common descent. The same book is giving you an image of animals that look exactly the same, but it claims that they're not for common descent.
Yes, because this book is trying to explain what I'm trying to explain, that analogy is also a thing and that it can be distinguished from homology. That's the whole point, and clearly Lanter did not read this book either. Look, the label on his own slide says, Figure 21.18, Convergent Evolution. Many marsupial species in Australia resemble placental mammals occupying similar ecological niches elsewhere in the world. Marsupials evolved in isolation after Australia separated from other continents. Convergent evolution is how you get analogous structures. And that's the whole point of this section of the book, and Lantern, rather than just engaging with it, is simply saying that it is a contradiction that scientists either haven't noticed or are simply lying about. It's hard to even comprehend just how dishonest Lantern is in this tactic.
What bigger contradictions can you have reading this book? I don't know how people are opening these books and reading them, and they're not realizing, you know what, man, what's going on here? In the previous page, you were telling me, the more they look similar, the more evidence that they are from common descent. The picture they gave me later on is, oh, they look exactly the same, but you know what? They're not actually from common descent, right? And you've got all of this picture that I put here, the picture next to it, showing you where they separated.
The way they're reading this and not noticing the contradiction is because there is no contradiction. And they can tell because they are actually reading the book, not looking for bits to cherry pick and dishonestly present as a contradiction despite not being in any way contradictory. But sure, if you decide to present a book as contradictory, you can find ways to do that. For example, numerous verses in the Quran say both that Allah guides people and that He leads them astray. Does this mean that the Quran is contradictory about Allah? I'll leave the broad question for others, but I would argue that these verses are not a contradiction, because if you read them in their context, Allah is guiding different people from those He is misguiding, and He is doing it primarily for reasons that are couched in moral terms, in that He tends to guide the righteous and misguide the evildoers. But if I wanted to be an Islamophobic dick, I could pretend that there is a direct conflict here. Or worse, I could pretend that Allah is portrayed as simply a deceiver in the Quran, and cherry-pick the verses that support this. If I did that, though, I'd be doing to Islam what Sabor and Ahmad are doing to science.
Right. So, according to them, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just wanted to add to that point that the same problem that you just highlighted exists at the genetic level. You get sequences which are so similar.
Okay, I'm gonna cut to that. No worry, I've prepared for them beautiful things today. Don't worry, right?
MashaAllah.
So,
oh, good. Visions of horrors to come.
Okay, moving on now. Like, first, they said to us what? Similarities are due to common descent. We gave them an example that the homology doesn't work, and they're lying.
No, that's not what happened. Lantern misrepresented both homology and his source text. Whether through intentional malice or incompetence, it's hard to say. Homology remains both excellent evidence for common ancestry, compatible with analogy, and not circular.
And that's what most laymen, they think, oh, these two things look the same. Therefore, that's what the guy was saying to me in the video if you watch it. Oh, they look the same. Therefore, they're from common descent. That's what laymen think it as evidence, right? Okay.
Yeah, because most lay people, you know, like Lantern, aren't well educated enough on the topic to be aware of all the complexities of the situation. Instead, they get a basic version of the science that is simple enough to understand, but is far too simple to be operational on the ground in an actual academic setting. But if those lay people want to understand more in depth, perhaps resolve what seems like an apparent contradiction, what they can do is learn. What's not appropriate to do is to simply pretend that biologists are lying about this, or simply haven't noticed and conclude that science is just fake news. That's the route that Lantern and Sabor have chosen, though.
Okay, moving on now.
Moving on to more of the same topic. Not the kind of moving on I'd hoped for.
We said similarities are due to common descent. We've got this research from Nature showing you how they separated 160 million years ago, those two types of animals, and that they're not closely related because they separated a long time ago.
Yep, as mammals, they're pretty distantly related. They separated in the Middle Jurassic. The Jurassic sure was a cool time. Well, not literally. It was actually quite hot. But hey, humans are trying to bring it back.
Okay, so the question is, why are they homologous?
Animals aren't homologous with each other. That's not how that word works. They have homologous structures, and both placental and marsupials have many homologous structures. They also sometimes have analogous structures. The reason for these analogous structures is that certain behaviors or structures are advantageous for certain ways of life, and so superficially similar animals can evolve separately. In other words, the reason for these analogies is natural selection.
They cannot find an explanation, so they make up a new thing. They call it convergent evolution.
That's neither made up nor a new thing. Instead, it's a prediction of evolution, and it goes all the way back to Chapter 6 of The Origin of Species. If it's in The Origin of Species by Darwin, it's not a new idea.
We've got the solution now. The answer to that question is actually, it's not just similarities are due to common descent, but some animals, because of the environment, they will evolve to look like other animals, even though they're not from common ancestry. So which one is it?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Those are not mutually incompatible ideas. They can both be true at once, just like Allah can both guide people and lead them astray.
Are similarities due to common descent?
Yes, when they are the result of homology, which can be tested for independent of any assumptions of common ancestry.
Or are animals, based on their environment, looking the same as other animals because the environment shaped them to be this way?
Also yes, which is why convergent evolution is usually detected through things like differences in underlying anatomy, as well as different embryological development of superficially similar structures.
Okay? The answer is, oh, some animals are like this, some animals are like that. Sorry, we found this problem, so now we're going to make this new theory, and we're going to call it convergent evolution. There you go, okay?
Actually, yes, it is okay, because both homology and convergence are well-understood aspects of evolutionary biology that are in no way in conflict with each other. Something Lantern might know if he had more understanding of biology than is typical of a 5th grader.
Now we move on. We say to them, okay, what about the bats and whales?
They have both convergently evolved echolocation and similar proteins to assist in this. In one case, an identical protein, but when you look at the neutral variation within the genes for these proteins, you see that they're basically uncorrelated, meaning that we have once again used actual science to tell if something is homologous and found that it is not.
They're not homologous in their anatomy, in their outside structure.
In some ways they are. They both have homologous hair, skin glands, teats, in some cases teeth, etc. These are things that put them both into the large taxa such as placental mammal, therian, mammal, tetrapod, vertebrate, etc.
And they are from different environments.
Yes, but those environments share the problem of low visibility. For toothed whales, that's in the form of murky or deep water, and for bats it's simply because they are nocturnal, so there's no sunlight. Both also share a pursuit hunting method for food acquisition, meaning they both need a way to detect and follow prey items that does not rely on sight. Since both live in a fluid medium, sound is an obvious alternative, since it's also a wave that reflects off of things like light is. You see, it's all of an animal's ecology that determines what natural selection will select for, which means that even in environments as different as the depths of the Pacific Ocean and the Sonoran Desert, you can get convergent evolution if organisms in both places face a similar obstacle. But you might notice that outside of the echolocation, bats and toothed whales are very different looking, and this is because despite the similar challenge in tracking and locating prey, nearly everything else about their lifestyles is different.
The conclusion, according to what you said to me, because it's environment or structure, that they are closely related, right? Why are they similar according to your own testimony?
Is he asking Sabor? I can't really tell. Once again, Lantern seems to struggle with basic pronoun use.
Why are they similar? Why do they have this echolocation system, both of them, functioning the same way?
Oh, except that bat and dolphin echolocation are actually not accomplished the same way. Whales use their bony nares and a structure called the phonic lips that are homologous to upper lips to produce the sound, which is then focused and amplified in a fatty structure on the head called a melon. Most bats use their larynx to make short, high-frequency clicks. They are essentially shouting really loud. A few bats use yet a third method, which is clicking with their tongues. And why is it that this superficially similar sensory mechanism has these deep underlying differences? Oh, of course, it's convergent evolution. These animals do not share an echolocating ancestor and so evolved superficially similar solutions to a shared problem, but did so in very different ways.
These two different things. One is a land animal, one is a sea animal.
I'd argue that bats are more of an air animal, but whatever.
Now, can you explain this to me? Can you give us an explanation of how to kind of reconcile between these things? They said, oh yeah, there is actually a new type of convergent evolution that you'll find in this research down here, where actually you can get these type of similarities between animals, even though they're not from the same environment, and even though that they're not homologous in their shapes. So,
I am baffled by this, honestly. That link is to a paper investigating whether eye tapping behavior used to find hollow bits under trees is convergent with echolocation in bats and toothed whales. It found that it was not, but found further support that the similarity between bat and cetacean echolocation is due to convergence, specifically in the case of convergent amino acid sequences and proteins. Nothing in here is about a new kind of convergent evolution. It's just the regular old convergent evolution we've known about since Darwin.
How long are you going to be moving the goalpost, you know? You took the goalpost with you home, literally. I don't know what you're going to do with the goalpost anymore, right?
I have no idea what he's talking about. Convergent evolution has always been a part of the theory of evolution, and it's something that can be objectively detected and objectively rejected, which happened in the paper he put in his sources, but clearly did not read.
And we asked the question, why are animals similar to bats?
Because bats are animals, so all the things that make any animal an animal are shared by bats. You know, things like multicellularity, heterotrophy, and a lack of cell walls.
Living in similar environments did not develop the ecosystem.
Hold on, now I'm confused by this sentence. Let's try again.
And we asked the question, why are animals similar to bats? Living in similar environments did not develop the ecosystem.
Okay, that was hard to parse, but I think I've got it. I think he's asking, why did animals that live in a similar environment to bats not also develop echolocation? Okay, it's because convergence is more granular than just living in the same place. The whole of the niche and environment is important. Bats developed echolocation because of their unique niche as nocturnal airborne insect hawkers. No other animal that I'm aware of has that exact niche, but if one did, I'd expect them to converge heavily on bat echolocation. Simply living in the same geographic region as bats is not enough.
Why is it only the whales that do that, while the animals that live around the same environments as the bats, and they are similar to it, did not develop that same echolocation system?
Because they're not chasing down prey in a 3D environment without the benefit of enough light to do it by sight. But toothed whales are.
So what we see is what? They keep contradicting themselves every 2 seconds, right?
No.
Okay, is that it? No, that's not it. We're not done. Okay, let's move on. They got something that we call the cichlid fish. Cichlid fish it's a very interesting example. Why? Because it's not just two animals that look alike that you can explain. Oh, just similar environments. No. It's one fish, one animal.
Cichlids are a whole family. They're not just one fish.
That produces different species that are exactly identical to the same type of fish in a different lake in a different environment.
Weird then how even on screen the images don't have identical fish on either side, just very similar ones. Is he blind or just lying? I'm going to go with lying, but if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments.
So 2 minutes ago, you're telling to me there's something called convergent evolution that can explain two animals that look similar and this and that. Okay, what about now one producing different fishes in different environments, in different lakes that are almost identical? How can you explain that?
The lakes are actually quite similar, and the similar cichlids have similar niches in those lakes. That's it.
How can you explain that by blind natural selection and blind processes that you claim are not directed and they happen by themselves because of evolution? The animals tries to survive, therefore it happens. So how can you explain this happening to us?
Mutations can affect body shape and color, and if selection in two different locations favors a similar condition and body shape, then populations in both locations will converge on that body shape and color. And when they start out very similar because of recent common ancestry, the resemblance can be very strong. Because it started out very strong, and both started from about the same place in terms of their anatomy before evolving these convergent shapes and colors.
What do they say? A new name, parallel evolution. Now the answer to that question is that some of these fishes, there is something new called parallel evolution, and when parallel evolution happens, this takes place. But actually...
No, it's just regular convergent evolution. This paper is about the extended evolutionary synthesis, which is basically just a bunch of non-evolutionary biologists complaining that evolutionary biologists are ignoring things like epigenetics, neutral evolution, and niche construction, which they're not. Those are well integrated into modern evolutionary biology. The extended synthesis guys have yet to propose a fundamentally new and heretofore unaccounted for type or mechanism for evolution.
The interesting thing that they said is that in that research, they said to you it's not just random blind natural selection, it is a guided one.
Natural selection is never random. And the guiding is not by a divine hand, but by the possibilities opened by both the structure of the organism and the environment. For example, this is from the paper. A more succinct hypothesis is that development bias and natural selection work together. Rather than selection being free to traverse across any physical possibility, it is guided along specific routes opened up by the process of development. Not exactly arguing for an intelligent design, is it? But also, it's not really arguing for anything that evolutionary biologists aren't already aware of.
That research I'm putting for you here, in the Nature magazine, they will say to you, developmental bias and natural selection work together rather than selection being free to transverse over any physical possibility. It is guided along specific routes. My question is, guided by who?
By those possibilities opened up by the process of development. It's right there in the paper. He's apparently reading the paper right now. Why is he not just answering his own question? It couldn't be dishonesty, could it?
Who's guiding this natural cell?
It's not a who, it's a what.
They just put a fancy name, parallel evolution, and they say to you that it has to be guided, and they don't give you an explanation.
The whole section on this part in that paper is an explanation. Lantern can say he doesn't like the explanation, that's fine, but to pretend that it's not there is dishonest.
Who's guiding it? Who's guiding that fish to produce the same exact...
It's not exact.
Species or almost identical to the same other fish that in a complete different location that you claim to us it is based on your environment, you have the evolution taking place.
Natural selection under the constraints of the pre-existing anatomy of cichlid fish.
Come on, what are you guys saying? You know, I'm more. I don't know how these people, يعني, subhanallah, I don't know how these people they can come with a straight face and say to you evolution is facts. I seriously don't know. Okay.
Oh, it's easy. You see, they start out with an honest and successful attempt to understand it, and not by concluding beforehand that it must be wrong because it's not in their favorite book, and then lying about it at every opportunity. But I also notice that Lantern doesn't have a straight face. If that's important to trustworthiness, does that mean that this is further indication that he's just a lying piece of shit? Normally I wouldn't say so, but hey, being straight-faced is his standard. So by his own standard, I judge him to be untrustworthy.
Okay, moving on.
You know, he can move on, and perhaps I should too. Let's see what we have for random mutations next time. Although I suspect he's just going to find articles that note that not all mutations are equiprobable, and then pretend that that means that they are entirely deterministic and not stochastic at all. I don't know if that's the case, that's why this is exciting. Anyway, if you liked this video, please be sure to hit the like button and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you hated the video, please hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Fair warning though, if you express your problem rudely, I'll probably match your energy. Either way, make sure you've subscribed and have notifications turned on so that you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovend, Phil Javara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Elron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Vollus, Eddie McCoy, Ita V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.